improvement, equality, involvement in the Western Trust, and I've been asked by the Gashar Welfare to come along today and interview Professor Luke Anthony O'Neill, and just to try and demystify some of the stories out there around coronavirus and COVID-19. Professor Luke Anthony John O'Neill is a professor of biochemistry in the School of Biochemistry and Immunology at Trinity College Dublin. Professor O'Neill was awarded the Royal Dublin Society and Irish Times Robert Boyle Medal for Scientific Excellence in 2009 and the Royal Irish Academy Gold Medal for Life Sciences in 2012. And apparently Professor O'Neill has a great passion to engage with the general public in scientific topics, so which way the reason he has joined us here today. Professor O'Neill, look, firstly, welcome to the Gashar Welfare. Thanks very much for taking your time to do this. And if you don't mind, I'm just going to jump on straight away.
Sure.
We hear talk about coronavirus and COVID-19. Can you explain why we use both those terms and what both actually mean?
Sure. So, of course, very, very happy to take part, by the way, Seamus. Thanks for the invite as well. It's great to get the information out there to people and inform them. And I mean, I'm working on COVID-19 in my own lab, you see, because I'm an immunologist and it's all about the immune system, really. So I'm very happy to share the knowledge I've got. And there's a massive appetite, isn't there, for knowledge in this. So it's a brand new virus, remember, never seen before in humans. And then it was only named back in February. And the name of the virus is SARS-CoV-2, which is a terrible mouthful, I know, because it's related to another virus called SARS, which stands for Severe Acute Respiratory Syndrome. That means the lungs are affected. It's called CoV because it's coronavirus. That's the family of viruses that's in it. CoV stands for coronavirus. And it's the second one. So there's a SARS-CoV and now SARS-CoV-2. And then the disease is called COVID, coronavirus infectious disease. And 19 is the year it was first described. So there's where the names come from. And as I say, it's in the coronavirus family. There are 7 members of the family, and each different viruses fit into different families. It's almost like a surname. Imagine these are the O'Neills, for instance, the 7 brothers, if you like, and this is the 7th one that's come along, and that's where that's how we understand it. And coronaviruses have been studied for years, really, you know.
All right, thanks a lot for explaining the difference between the two. So, really starting from the beginning, Professor O'Neill, where did this virus come from?
Yeah, well, that's the big question, Seamus, and there's really good evidence now it came from bats, as people probably have realized. So these coronaviruses, they live in bats, and the bats don't get sick, interestingly, and many other animals have viruses and they live quite happily. The trouble is it jumped from a bat into a human, and then us humans had never seen it before. Our immune systems weren't ready, and this thing then began to cause disease in us because obviously our bodies, you know, we're sort of a happy hunting ground for this virus to live in, and it made us really sick, and the disease then begins to emerge. So all the evidence suggests it was from a bat, and of course it's China and Wuhan. It's been tracked to there, and it was a market there where they had live bats on sale, and they reckon it jumped from a live bat into a human, and then off it went. And it's a staggering thing, Seamus. You know, a single case, remember, happened in Wuhan sometime last year, and there's 20 million people are infected from that single human being. So it's highly contagious, you know.
And we've heard some stories, I'm sure yourself, Professor O'Neill, about it being man-made. Is there any evidence to suggest that, or you know, where is the evidence that this originated in bats and then moved to humans?
Sure. Yeah. Well, we know it's not man-made because if you tamper with the virus and you do things in a lab to a virus, you leave a mark on the virus. The chemistry is a bit different. You can see it, you know, and we know this virus is a natural virus is the first thing we would say that wasn't tampered with by humans. The question then becomes, where did the bat come from? There's a tiny chance they were studying this virus in a lab in China, the natural virus, and maybe it got out somehow. There seems less evidence for that, but that's still a sort of a possibility, I guess. But the main evidence would suggest it's from the wild, you know, and these bats were captured, brought to the market. And what we know as well, Seamus, is if you stress a bat, you make a bat very stressed, it'll release 10 times the amount of virus than when it's not stressed. And these are live markets. So the bats were really stressed, you know, and therefore we think lots of virus came out of the bat and then infected the human.
And you mentioned there about it being so contagious. You know, why is this so contagious? Why is this such a big deal? Why is it always on the news? Why are we having lockdowns? Why is it so contagious?
Well, but again, because it's brand new, and then it goes into your body and your immune system hasn't seen it before, it can't really get going properly. So the immune system takes a while to sort of trigger, I suppose you might say. Remember, the immune system is there to defend us against viruses and bacteria and all sorts of things. So the immune system is basically inexperienced. And the virus now begins to grow a bit, and then it begins to go all over your body. And in fact, we know a lot about that. So what happens is the virus, you inhale it through your nose, or you might swallow it even, or whatever it might be. It gets into your lungs eventually. The reason it's in your lungs is it's got a spike protein on its surface. You may have seen pictures of it, the little balls with spikes all around them. Those spikes stick into your lungs, and they stick into a special sort of, I guess, a lock, like a key going into a lock. That lock is called ACE2, and now the door opens and the virus is inside your body, you know. And that ACE2 is highly expressed. It's all over the lungs, you know. So the virus can get in then quite quickly. So even a small amount of virus in your body can then penetrate because it's got the spike ready to go and open the lock and get inside the cells. That's why we think it's so contagious.
And Professor Lee, why does it affect different people in different ways? Why does some people get very, very sick and some people aren't, you know, there's no symptoms at all? Why would that be?
Well, what's amazing is when it began to emerge back, say, early this year, and I remember the first case in Ireland was February 29th, and that seems like, I suppose it's like a long time ago now, given what we've been through, but it's quite recent, you know? And then, of course, scientists and doctors study the types of people being infected. It became very clear early on, older people did badly with this disease. So that's the first thing. It's effectively a disease of old people. If you're over 60, over 70, you have a much higher risk of having a severe disease. The reason is quite simple, because your immune system is old as well. Like other parts of your body get old, as we know, so does the immune system. So the virus now gets a foothold and begins to grow, you know, begins to do mischief. In your body, you have no immune system to fight it, or at least the immune system is weak in older people. The second big group that we worry about are people with diabetes or heart disease. There's various other diseases, high blood pressure. That's putting your body under pressure already. And then you got a virus inside. That's like a two-punch thing, I suppose. And therefore, those people are at risk of the virus getting a foothold as well. The other big question, though, is some people definitely have more severe disease than others. And that could be genetic. We think there could be, your immune system is different to mine, just like our faces are different, you know, so our immune, slight differences in our immune system. Maybe my immune system is less good than yours and therefore I get more disease. That's a big amount of research happening. Can we find out why some people might have a genetic difference and what would those genes be? Because of course you might target that then and somehow correct it, you know, and that could be a therapeutic approach. So those are some of the thinking behind why some people get more severe disease. The last bit to remember is the dose is very important. If you take on a huge amount of virus because someone close to you is very infected, that'll really beat up your body because now you've got a massive amount inside you, you know. So the level of virus going into you can also determine what might happen next.
That's really interesting. So, you know, the amount of virus that you actually take on can depend then on how ill you get. So I suppose on that basis, Professor O'Neill, what's the best way to ensure that you don't catch the virus?
Yeah.
You know, what's the best steps to take?
Well, as we all know, and in Derry, it's like Dublin and every city all over the world is doing this now, isn't it? So it's an infectious disease. So it'll jump from me into you, right? So we got to stay apart. Social distancing will mean the virus won't get to you from me if I'm infected. That's the first thing. The 2-meter rule, as we know. Masks are extremely important because they cover your mouth and stop the virus coming out. And the way to think of a mask is, it's like it's a fire burning in our cities and you're breathing embers. So a mask will trap the ember, and there's really good science for this. There wasn't evidence for this actually back in February, and in fact, back then the recommendation was, and even I was saying this, the WHO said, only wear a mask if you're coughing and if you have a symptom. We now know the virus comes out by breathing. Isn't that a terrible thing? So in other words, just breathing brings it. So we all have to wear masks. Secondly, you can spread it with no symptoms, and that makes it especially mischievous. I mean, in some ways, it's kind of the perfect virus from its point of view, because you'll be wandering around, you'd have no symptoms, and yet you're infecting someone. You know, it's terrible. Whereas with the flu or with SARS, you have lots of symptoms, and now you spread it, you know. So that makes it really difficult to contain. So mask wearing is critical, because you may well think you're healthy, but you might have the virus in your body, and the mask will then stop you spreading it. So that's the second big thing. Third is hand hygiene, because you might be touching things where the virus is. You got to be careful. You might put your hand up to your mouth and spreads that way. So keep washing the hands all the time. Those are the 3 huge big measures that we all have to keep doing, of course, and keep hearing about them, don't we, the whole time. The other thing to say, Seamus, is, and the Japanese were very good on this early on. They were good with the messaging. They said, avoid the 3 C's. Crowded places, because it'll spread between people, obviously. Closed spaces, because indoors the virus might be lingering in the air. So it's better to be outdoors or have good ventilation is the second C, and then close contact between 2 people. They're the 3 things to avoid. Now, Seamus, those can stop the spread of this virus. We don't need fancy medicines or vaccines. We will need them eventually, of course, but these measures are very effective at slowing down the spread of this virus, you know.
I suppose, look, from a personal, I'm trying to think if other people will be watching this. You know, look, I'm a parent. My daughter is to return to school. I've listened to what you were saying about the closed spaces, you know, and the having distance has been extremely important. There is a lot of talk of media about young people returning to school and what that might mean for the spread of the disease. Is there an increased risk for young people going back to school? And does that also bring an increased risk to their surrounding family? And how does that offset as well too on, say, the opening of pubs and cinemas and stuff? So how does all that stuff interconnect if the children go back to school?
Sure. Well, it's all about risk, Jim. I mean, everything's risky. You can never get rid of risk completely with anything in life, let's face it. And this virus is the same. So you're trying to what we call mitigate the risk. Can you introduce things like mask wearing or distancing to mitigate the risk of infection spreading? And that's what's in public health mind the whole time. Can we mitigate the risk? When it comes to schools, it's a risky thing, there's no doubt. But on the other side, it's essential kids go back to school because they suffer hugely from being out of school educationally. They do less well, and especially from disadvantaged backgrounds because they can't get access to fancy technology and the homeschooling mightn't be as effective. So it's really important that children go back to school, and you weigh that up against the risk then of the virus spreading. Now, to decrease the risk of the virus in schools, they have to observe all the things schools are doing. It's great. And certainly in Dublin, for instance, they're introducing a very sort of stringent series of measures, distancing in classrooms, a lot of hand hygiene. Ventilation is important as well. And now mask wearing. You may have seen just the other day, they said in secondary schools, they should wear masks. Now, you can't get primary school kids to wear a mask, very hard to comply. It's very difficult to implement, but certainly for secondary school kids, mask wearing will now be needed in schools. Now, maybe outside the classroom in corridors and places, but it may also be inside the classroom as well. And of course, the big one is to protect the teachers. You don't want them getting infected either. So they'll have to wear masks to some extent, I suppose. So all these measures then give you some confidence. Now, what's very nice, James, is we've looked at other countries. Japan reopened its schools. So did Uruguay, for instance. So did Germany. There were little outbreaks here and there, but they were containable, And there's no evidence as yet that a child gets infected and comes home and infects, say, a grandparent. That's the big risk here, by the way. Because remember, children fight this virus fine. There's almost no illness in children. So they pick it up and they're fine, But if they go home or whatever it might be and infect a relative or someone who's vulnerable, then it might get much worse in them. So again, they're looking at it very closely. And there's very limited evidence that's happening. Now, of course, that might change. And the more schools open, the more data we're going to get. You never know, we might have to change the policy. So it really is a work in progress. But all the worries of school are outweighed by the importance of getting kids back into school at the moment, and that would change if we see infection spreading from schools. So we're keeping our fingers firmly crossed that won't happen.
Okay, it's great even as a parent myself, to kind of hear that, because you hear so much conversations, and I take the point that the children are very little risk for themselves. The evidence seems to be saying that, but it's beyond that. A lot of people have their parents looking after their children, so
Yep.
There's far wider family context to be thinking about. We are hearing a lot about as well too now, whenever the children heading back to school, the possibility of a second surge in the winter. But why is that, and what is the links? Or what additional risk comes with the traditional flu season?
Yeah, it's very simple. We're back indoors again. So we're losing one of the C's, we're back in enclosed spaces in the winter because obviously it's colder and so on. And then these things like flu, other respiratory diseases spread in the winter for that reason. So that's the fear that when we go back indoors again in September, October, November, we're going to see outbreaks again. Now, it is likely that will happen. And then what you have to have is the test, trace, isolate system in place. So you find someone who's infected, you isolate them, you test everybody around them, isolate them for 2 weeks. Now, it's not easy, but this is what other countries are doing as well. So in other words, even though there is an increased risk in the winter, if your testing, tracing, isolating system is really robust, you can put the fire out quite quickly, But there's no doubt there's bound to be slight increases in the winter. Now, the term surge kind of means the whole place is infected, out of control, like a massive wave, That's less likely. We'll see little ripples, some people call them actually, little spikes of infection here and there that can be contained is the likely scenario.
And then in linking to the flu, would the advice be that people should get the flu jab if they can't get it? Is there an increased risk if I get the flu that my immune system would be a lot more down and could likely then get coronavirus?
That's a good question, James, to be honest. There's no evidence for that at the moment, which is good. It's not very likely, to be honest. Certainly, we want to see lots of flu vaccination happening because that means there'll be less pressure on the hospitals, because obviously every winter it's flu season, lots of people, and if there's pressure on the hospitals from coronavirus as well as flu, it puts extra pressure on the hospitals. So the recommendation, and may become mandatory, I think in the UK, we're talking about this, in Ireland, not as such yet, but certainly it may become mandatory to vaccinate all the vulnerable people for flu pretty soon, The good news, by the way, is in Australia, where the winter is already happening, there's less flu. because of the masks and the hand washing and the distancing. That stops the flu spreading as well, remember. So there's a really low incidence of flu in some countries where normally the flu season would be high. An added benefit of the measures we're taking is less flu. This gives you the scientific evidence that all the things we're doing are good, by the way, because that would be similar to COVID, you know. So that's a good sort of positive effect of all the things that we're doing.
Look, you mentioned previous answer there in terms of the tracking and the tracing and tracking. You know, there is the PHA have an open one now here in the north.
Yeah.
What is the benefit of downloading that and having it in your phone? You know, how will I benefit, and how can I help the wider society benefit by having that app on my phone?
That's another weapon. I mean, all these things are little tricks we can do, you see, and it adds to your weapon set, if you like, to fight the damn thing, you know. So if we all have the app on our phone, we can click into it and see where the virus is, and certainly you can see where the various places are. You can say if you're well or not, and that can be useful for the public health people. And then, of course, if someone is infected and your phone data shows you're near them, then they can contact you quite quickly, you see. So that app is a very useful way to do contact tracing, as we call it, because, and of course, the privacy is built into it. You know, it's all very cleverly done in a sense. People needn't worry about privacy issues. So that app is essential. Everybody should have that app on their iPhones for definite, because yet again, it's another weapon to use. And why wouldn't we use every weapon we can at our disposal to beat this thing? And that app is another really good weapon to use.
And again, look, a gas yard fail is based in Derry, you know, and it's obviously in a border county. How important is it that we think across the whole of the island whenever we're trying to deal with this coronavirus? And if there is a surge, say in Donegal or in Derry, how important is it that we work collectively on a whole island approach to try and stop it?
It's essential, Seamus, and our Taoiseach was up there, up in Stormont, and there was lots of discussions going. Fantastic to see that, because we want to have the same policy, really. It's obvious. The virus doesn't care about borders, you know, so therefore we should have an all-Ireland approach to this for definite. And the two policies are pretty consistent anyway at the moment. We've got the shared app, for example. That's a great development, you know. So we've got to work at that a bit more, I think. And certainly, if we want to get to a stage, what's called zero COVID, because you can actually begin to think about getting rid of it if you apply all these measures stringently, that would have to be a one island approach, you see. And then the big question then becomes inward travel. So there has to be the same policy in all the airports on the island of Ireland to make sure they're following the same regulations, because otherwise, if it's different, someone might get infected in one part of the country and travel to the other and bring the infection with them, you see. So that island idea, now we get that from like Taiwan, New Zealand. The places that have got to zero COVID are islands, because they can restrict their borders more effectively, you see. So therefore, a whole island policy has worked in those two places. So it should also work for Ireland.
Okay, a lot of conversations and talk about our number. Why go and explain what that is and why it's so important?
Yeah, it's a funny word, isn't it? Yeah, it's called reproduction number. What it means is, if I'm infected, how many people will I infect? So if the R number is 2, I would infect 2 people. They then both infect 2, and suddenly now you're going to 4 people, and then you go to 8, and then you get to 16, and it spreads like wildfire, right? If the R number is below 1, let's say it's 0.8 or whatever, that means it'll take 10 people to infect 8. You see what I mean? So the number 0.8 sounds strange. That's the way it would work. That will gradually burn out, because those 8 then infect 7, the 7 infects 6, and it gradually ramps down. So that's why the R number has to be below 1 to stop the spread of this virus, is the way to think of it. And it's simply a measure of how many people get infected from one person or a group of people, if you like, you know. And as the virus begins to go, that number goes down because of less spread. You know, it's just a way to measure spread of the virus, I guess.
And why is it so important in terms of decisions being made then by our government on local lockdowns or you know, increasing or decreasing our movement around? Why if it goes over, say, 1, does that become really important to them?
Well, if it goes below 1, you're in a good place, as I say, because it won't be spreading that much, you know. If it goes above 1, that means it's spreading quite rampantly, in a sense, especially if it's 2 or 3. Even 1.5 is too high, really. Then you've got to have really sort of look at the places that do the lockdown, like we saw in Laois and Offaly and Kildare. I got up to 1.8 there, I think. So that was the reaction to that number then, is to institute measures to stop the spread of the virus. So they're using that number to decide what measures to introduce. If it's below 1, the measures don't have to be there as much. The usual things we just mentioned, nothing else beyond that. If it goes above 1, you got to limit travel, you got to limit, you know, various activities, and and all around the world, this is what's happening, of course. So they watch that number very, very closely.
If you don't mind, I'm going to move to vaccines. Look,
Yep.
and just ask you about vaccines. I'd want to have just a general conversation on vaccines alone because there's a lot of myths out there in terms of vaccines, what goes on them, and some things that they can do to your body. And if we could maybe touch on that
Yep.
generally, can you explain this how a vaccine works,
Yep.
what goes on, and the testing that goes on it, and as I say, take away some of the must around the vaccine approach for not just coronavirus but for all
Yep.
our illness.
No, we're now into my specific area, of course, James. I'm an immunologist, and we immunologists love vaccines. Let's get that stated out there immediately. The reason why we love them is they are the single biggest contribution to human health in history. They've saved millions and millions and millions of lives. Now we're talking about polio, which was a devastating disease. As people, we're too young to remember it, but certainly our parents and grandparents, a crippling illness. Measles kills children, diphtheria, the list goes on, and all these vaccines have made a huge difference, right? And that's why we like them so much. And remember, what they are is they're a bit of the bug that's going to cause the illness. It can be the spike protein in the case of our favorite SARS-CoV-2 virus. It can be the whole virus somehow inactivated so as it can't infect you anymore. Inject that in, and the immune system now recognizes that, and now it's ready when the real bad guy comes along. The best analogy I use, James, is it's like the sheriff puts up wanted posters around the town, and now the real bad guy arrives, and then he gets neutralized by the immune system, you see. And this has been proven over nearly 250 years now. The first vaccine was for smallpox. I'd also say this, that every single health agency in the world says vaccinate your children with the vaccines that we have. So there's a massive consensus. Now, there is concern, of course. People are worried about them. There's a thing of vaccine hesitancy that we're all very conscious of. And it's understandable why some people would have worries. There might be side effects they'd worry about. And some vaccines have had side effects. There's no doubt about it. So we need to be very, very careful. At the moment, there's 170 vaccines now in trials for COVID-19. You wouldn't believe the safety measurements going on with those vaccines, because if they get one wrong, you can imagine that will frighten people. They might stop using other vaccines, and that will cause mayhem. All these infectious diseases will go up again, you see. That'll be a disaster. So safety first with vaccines, and then secondly, efficacy, to make sure they're protecting people from getting infected, And as I say, I'm very sympathetic. We do see vaccine hesitancy with parents and so on, and we just got to say, look, the evidence is very strong. There's a massive consensus around this. So the advice is to do it. Now that's with the other vaccines. We're still waiting for this vaccine to emerge, and we got to make sure it's safe. Now, when they press go on that vaccine, and we don't know when it's going to be, but it will be next year sometime, hopefully, then everybody should take the vaccine, especially vulnerable people to begin with, and healthcare workers. And then we begin to see the virus being beaten, because the vaccine is the way to stop this virus 100% for definite. It's the main weapon we would have to stop this virus and limit it, And therefore we see vaccines as really the answer in many ways.
You can't answer my next question, which was around when a vaccine may or may not be ready, because obviously everybody's lives have changed. We're living what people are describing as a new normal, and that new normal could go on for an extensive period of time. We were actually quite lucky in Ireland. Whenever it hit, the weather was very good. So whenever it went on the lockdown, people found new love in their backyardens and their greens and that, but that will not be possible over the winter. And obviously there's a worry and concern about people's mental health and well-being and their resilience.
Absolutely. Yep.
So in that context, what is the timescale? What is the expectation of a vaccine? Is it early next year, middle next year? Is it really difficult to say? Is there different people working at different levels?
Well, you've never seen an effort like it. I mean, as I say, there's so many now being tested. A good analogy is a football field, and you have 160 players on the field trying to score a goal here. Hopefully one of them will score the goal, 6 of them are at the advanced stage of testing. It's called a phase 3. That's the last stage. It's incredibly fast, and everybody's got behind this. All the big drug companies, small drug companies, universities, all doing their very, very best to get a vaccine. So 6 are out front. And it is a bit like footballers, I suppose. Let's hope one of them is near the goal mouth now and score a goal. Now, how long is it going to take? It takes months and months. I mean, if we're lucky, we might have it by the middle of next year, would be my opinion. Because the reason is safety testing, by the way. That's why these things take so long, because you got to be very careful. So in 2021, some stage, we're hopeful. Now, again, our knowledge of vaccines tells us they sometimes fall down. And they can fall down, they don't work. That's the first thing. Secondly, there might well be little reactions to them that are not unacceptable, So that's happened in the past. So we can't be 100% sure of it. The great phrase that Tony Fauci, who's our big guru, he's the big immunologist in America who was advising Trump for his sins. He's cautiously optimistic, he said. So that's a really good phrase, isn't it? You've also got vaccines in Russia and China allegedly being used widely already. Now, they would have skipped some of the safety testing, which would give you concern. But certainly, let's see what happens to them. They're using similar technologies to some of the vaccines being tested in the UK and in the US, for instance. So that might give us a bit more comfort if they see effects there, you see. So it's absolutely foot to the floor on this one. Massive effort going in, and we're all on the edge of our seats now, just praying, I guess, that this is going to deliver for us.
Right. So I start feeling unwell. What would you advise that I should do?
This is a great question. It's essential now. What hasn't been happening is, if you feel a bit fluey and you've got a bit of a cough, make sure you go to your GP. Get on the phone, go and see the GP, because that means you might have COVID-19. And we've got to make sure that people stay at home then with these symptoms, you see. So the first instruction is, if you feel the problem with this would be you might have a cold and it's similar, you know, and that will clog up the health service. But still, because of this pandemic, any symptoms that, now you know the symptoms are, a bit of a temperature is a real big one, a cough, sniffles, loss of sense of smell is interesting. That's another one that seems, especially, other viruses do that, but that seems especially prominent with COVID-19. So any of those, 1 or 2 or 3 of those symptoms, if you feel unwell, contact your GP and take it from there. Now you might be tested for COVID, and then you might have to go into quarantine for 2 weeks, and that's just what we have to do to stop it spreading. Remember, that's another thing about this, that stop the thing spreading. Now, of course, if you get especially ill, now some are going to have a difficult course. They reckon about 15% of people, Seamus, will have, you know, quite severe symptoms. Then you might end up in hospital, sadly. And then, of course, very sadly, about 5%. There's a very timely sneeze for you. 5% of people end up with quite a severe disease, and they can end up in the ICU. Luckily enough, it's less than 1% fatality rate. Now, it's still a lot of people, you see, and they're the older people, you know. So we know a lot about the disease course now. Now, remember, what I'd say as well is, there's good news. If we don't get a vaccine, or if it takes a lot longer, we're getting better at treating patients in hospitals. There are more effective therapies. The death rate's actually going down because of these. And there's various drugs now you can give patients, and some of them are working, you see. There's loads of trials running for that's my area, to be honest. Anti-inflammatories is what I work on. We're trying to find new medicines as well. So that will take the fear out, James. If we get a treatment, the fear will begin to go away. The big treatment hope, by the way, are antibodies themselves. Now, as you probably know, the immune system makes these things called antibodies. They neutralize the virus. You can use antibodies as drugs, inject antibodies into people, and drug companies make them for all kinds of things. And there's 40 trials at the moment, antibody therapies. And I'm very hopeful about those, by the way, because they're very safe, you see. And remember, that's like giving someone a medicine. The antibodies, like you're giving them a medicine, and that virus now gets attacked by the antibody. So this is the likely series of events that we'll see in the next few months, I guess. But that symptomology is a great question. Anybody with symptoms, you've got to stay home, ring up your GP, because otherwise you might spread the virus. And we're trying to stop the virus spreading, you know.
And again, what advice would you give to somebody who maybe missed out on their holiday this year? They're thinking about, you know, what they might do next year. You know, would you in confidence say to people next year, go ahead, book your summer 2021 holiday? It's likely things might be different, or should we still remain cautious?
Cautious. I would. No, I'd still be cautious. We're optimistic, but there's a chance that it's not going to work necessarily. There's also a chance that all the measures we're taking with the hand washing, it'll still be spreading a bit in our communities, you know. So we got to be still cautious. Sadly, I wouldn't be booking any holidays next year for definite. And you want to stay in Ireland anyway? Go wherever you want to go, in the north or the south, and spend your money locally. Tough it out in the rain like the rest of us. You know, that's probably the advice. But certainly, I wouldn't know. I'd be cautious about travel. We don't see travel coming back properly till there's a vaccine, really, because the travel itself mightn't be dangerous, but mixing people between countries, you know, that can increase risk of spread again. So I'd be very cautious when it comes to travel. I think that what I'd say to people most of all is, science is doing its very best, James. They're all, and my own lab is one. There's loads of labs all over the world trying our best, you know. Someone's going to get there, and it'll be next year is our big hope. So just got to hang on. That some of this science gives us the answer to this damn thing, and in the meantime we got to keep doing what we do anyway with the social distancing, and those are all the weapons we have at our disposal too. See, everybody can make a difference by doing all these things as well, you see. So just if we just hang in there and tough it out, we will see progress. It will go away. We will beat it. There's no question this is a beatable virus from our history of other viruses. We've managed to contain them in various ways. So we're optimistic that we'll get there in the end. The problem is we just don't know when it's going to be.
Health improvement is obviously my background. It's the role I have here in the Western Trust, and the one I had previously whenever I managed the Boxing and Brandon Way Health Forum. What benefit is it for people to improve their general well-being in terms of their nutrition and their physical activity over this period of time? Can that help them either A, stop the virus attacking them, or B, if that isn't possible, build up the resistance in their body? I just want to know if there's anything that, any value could be happening with that.
Really important questions. We can help our immune systems tremendously with good nutrition. First, a good balance, the usual things that we're all supposed to be doing anyway, in a sense. You don't need to do anything special here. Try and keep your diet healthy, the usual fiber and all the usual mix of proteins and so on. And just a regular diet's great, Exercise is very good for you because that boosts the immune system, gets the blood churning, and the blood is where the immune system is. So regular exercise, you needn't overdo it. Look, the usual guidelines. A brisk stroll will suffice. The third one that's really important is try not to stress, because it's very difficult the times we live in. People are going to get stressed anyway over this, but try to do stuff that you enjoy. The usual advice on de-stressing, exercise helps with that as well. Because the reason that's important is chronic stress damages the immune system. There's a hormone called cortisol, which actually damages the immune system. So therefore, try to keep the stress levels as low as possible. Things like alcohol can be damaging. A little bit of moderation, though, is probably okay if you're that way inclined, but don't overdo it for definite, because that will damage the immune system as well. Try not to smoke. That's another risk factor, because that damages the lungs, you see. So really, it's the standard health guidelines are essential, really, to help us, boost our own defense against this virus, I guess.
And obviously, social media has such a massive impact in how we receive information now, and it's sometimes not the best place to get information. How much value should we put on the social media in terms of how we know how the virus is moving across our communities? And top of that, where would be the best place to get advice, given that sometimes social media isn't the best place for that?
Yeah, social media can be tricky. I mean, I'm on Twitter. Twitter's great, by the way. I follow about 100 things on Twitter about COVID-19, really reputable. The WHO, for instance, they've got 3 or 4 different Twitter addresses. They're brilliant, and they tweet information the whole time. The Guardian science journalist is superb. I follow him. I follow all the scientific stuff as well, obviously. So Twitter's good for information, as long as it's reputable, follow a few things. And then I tweet information to people. I never read tweets because I'm too busy and you wouldn't want to read them anyway. So I block all that because that's distracting, So I use Twitter as a source of information and a way to spread information. And if you want to follow people like me, I will tweet stuff I think's been already validated, So follow some people who you feel you can trust is important as well. I wouldn't be going near Facebook because that's a real mess, but I think Twitter's quite good, you see, for these things. But the best source of information are our governments, remember. I mean, in Dublin is the HSE. They've got a great website. I know the NHS is brilliant as well. So the health executive is really good for information as well. So you needn't go beyond those, really, I mean, I have to follow stuff because I work on the virus. And I get what's amazing is, James, the amount of scientific discovery is breathtaking at the moment. I mainly get that through links to scientific journals on Twitter, for instance. So it's a really important source of information for me. But for anybody can follow these things on Twitter or whatever it might be. And I'd recommend that because it's up to date. It keeps coming in, The WHO is probably the other one I'd recommend. So there's ways to do this. There's an awful lot of rubbish out there, though. Avoid the rest of it, because there's an awful lot of nonsense as well in social media, which you have to avoid, which is the sad part of social media. We're all aware of this, aren't we, at this stage, I suppose. But there are reputable things you can follow. And they'll give you reassurance, remember, because they will update all the positives as well, which is very important.
Yeah, so I suppose the main point there, make sure to go to reputable sites, the Public Health Agency in the north and the HSC there in the south. Look, just moving on then, any other advice you would like to give the people over the next couple of months? Things like we've got the washing the hands, we've got the wearing the mask, we've got the distancing, try and keep ourselves active and eat good nutritional food.
Yep.
Anything else that we probably should just keep in the back of our mind just to keep us focused, moving beyond Christmas and into the new year?
I think we've got to have a sense of community. So that's the most important thing. We'll beat this virus together, remember, if we all act together. And all the things we've been discussing, just keep doing that all the damn time. You're not powerless. You can do these things and you we can beat the virus together. And what I really like seeing is this sense of community has grown a lot. Let's hope it doesn't fracture as it gets tougher. It is going to potentially get tougher, right? And then people mightn't have any money. The stress you mentioned with lockdown, all that's in the back of our minds the whole time. So we have to be very conscious of helping each other through this time. And the vulnerable people, most of all, think about them. Don't think about yourself. Think about the elderly, the people with diseases. A civilized society is supposed to look after people, remember, and not let them die. Modern medicine was invented to stop people dying, you see. So we must maintain that sense of community through this very difficult period. There will be tough times ahead in the winter. You can imagine if there has to be a lockdown in a city in Ireland or whatever, that's going to really stress people out as well. And we need our governments, of course, to be really good with us and keeping us informed, be very straight with us, be transparent, all those things. And then if we do all that, then we're buying time, James. The vaccine will come. The therapies are getting better already, and that just buys us time to come out of this, you see, successfully. So they're the things to keep in mind, and never stop giving up hope in a sense, because there's massive effort going on your behalf. There's tens of thousands of scientists and doctors all over the world trying to beat this for you, So keep, wish them well, I suppose, the other thing I'd say, and pat them on the back of it, because they're all working really hard. And our medical people are doing tremendous jobs in the hospitals as well for us. So there's grounds for optimism here, you see. And nobody should feel that this is a devastating thing that's going to be, really damaging for years to come. That's not the case.
Professor Ernie, thank you so much for demystifying some of the rumors and the stories out there around about coronavirus, and as I say, making it really simple to understand where the virus came from and how it moves through our communities. And look, I've certainly benefited from your, the questions that you've answered here. And thanks very much for coming and being part of FADA this year.
Delighted. I must come up. I'll come up in person next time if you have it again when we're back together again. It'd be lovely.